You know the funniest thing about being laughed at by an entire room? It's not that they think you're crazy, it's that you know you're right. And in just a few minutes, every single one of them is going to pay for mocking you. As the investors raised their champagne glasses and the cameras swept across the ballroom, I looked up at the $100 million building and thought to myself, run, before it's too late. My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 47 years old, and I've been an architect in Chicago for more than 22 years. You probably wouldn't recognize my name from newspaper headlines or the glamorous fundraising galas on the Gold Coast. But if you've ever worked in an office tower downtown, taken your child to a public library, or stopped by a community center on the South Side, there's a good chance you've walked through a building I helped create. To my colleagues, I'm the kind of guy who seems a little outdated. I still carry a worn leather notebook instead of keeping everything on an iPad. I prefer sketching the first lines of a design with a pencil, spending hours beside a cup of black coffee that's long gone cold in an office that's still lit close to midnight. I'm not great at networking, and I never learned how to turn myself into the star of a flashy presentation. But I love this profession with every ounce of seriousness I have. I've always believed that a building is more than a multi-million-dollar business deal. It's where people go to work, fall in love, raise their children, and feel safe walking through the doors every day. After my divorce 6 years ago, I moved into a small house in the western suburbs to live with my father. He's 74, a retired firefighter. His knees ache whenever the weather changes, but he's just as stubborn as ever. On Sunday mornings, we sit in front of the TV watching football, arguing about which team is going to win. He complains that I work too much. I get even by reminding him to take his medication on time. That life wasn't glamorous. Between divorce payments, medical bills, and the endless repairs a house always seems to need, I had to watch every dollar. But there was one thing I never negotiated away: my principles. If your name is attached to a building, you should be proud enough to let your own family walk into it without a second thought. That's why, when my firm landed the most ambitious skyscraper project Chicago had seen in decades, I poured everything I had into it. 11 months of sleepless nights, missed Thanksgivings, missed birthdays, sacrificed weekends. I believed it would become the greatest legacy of my career. And just like any other morning, I drove to the office that day with a cup of gas station coffee in my hand, completely unaware that my life was about to change forever. Then Jason Reed showed up, 31 years old, handsome in the way people are when they always know a camera is pointed at them. Perfect white teeth, expensive watches, and social media accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers. He posted day in the life of an architect videos from trendy coffee shops in River North, shared leadership philosophies through inspirational quotes, and always knew exactly what to say to make the executives nod in approval. People love Jason, or at least they love the image he created. Behind my back, Jason called me the dinosaur. At first, it was nothing more than knowing glances whenever I pulled out my notebook during meetings in the glass-walled conference room overlooking Michigan Avenue. "We need fresh thinking," Jason would say with an innocent smile. "Maybe Ethan should let the people under 50 explain modern design trends." The room would laugh. Some hid their smiles behind paper coffee cups. Others pretended to check their phones. No one objected. Neither did I. I kept working. I arrived before sunrise and was the last person to turn off the lights every night. I reviewed every structural calculation and refined every tiny detail of the project. While Jason filmed behind-the-scenes content for his followers, I sat alone in front of my computer, calculating the things that could determine the safety of thousands of people. Then the day of the final presentation arrived. When I finished, the room fell silent for a few seconds before applause broke out. Even the CEO stood up and shook my hand. "Ethan, this is the finest work you've ever done." For the first time in months, I drove my old sedan home feeling hopeful. I stopped at a takeout place near the suburbs, picked up my father's favorite meal, and thought maybe all those sleepless nights had been worth it. A week later, the company held a press conference to unveil the project. The stage lights came on. Jason Reed walked to the podium. The design was mine. The concept was mine. The groundbreaking innovations were mine. But on the giant LED screen behind him, the name displayed on every slide was Jason Reed. I confronted him immediately after the event. "What the hell is this?" Jason adjusted the button on his suit jacket and smiled. "Maybe you forgot who finalized the last version." Then he leaned in close enough that no one else could hear. "Maybe it's time for you to start thinking about retirement." I looked around. The people who had applauded me avoided eye contact. A few turned away as if they hadn't seen anything. Not a single person spoke up. At that moment, I thought it was the worst thing that could possibly happen to me. I was wrong. I requested a private meeting with CEO Richard Lawson first thing the next morning. Outside the glass office on the 32nd floor, employees walked by a little slower than usual. An intern carrying a stack of files glanced at me briefly before quickly looking away. Two people near the pantry pretended to be discussing last night's baseball game, but their eyes kept drifting toward the closed door. Rumors spread faster than internal emails. Richard closed the office door behind us. He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and let out a long sigh. "Ethan, have a seat." "I don't want to sit down." I fought to keep my voice steady. "I want to know why my design has Jason Reed's name on it." He was silent for a few seconds. A pause. Then the answer landed like a punch to the gut. "Ethan, Jason has a very bright future." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "The board loves him," Richard said, lowering his voice. "He attracts media attention. Investors trust him. He's the face this company needs right now." "And what am I?" Richard turned toward the window, staring down at the traffic crawling along Michigan Avenue. "Don't make this into a problem." I laughed. A dry, bitter laugh that didn't even sound like my own. "A problem," I repeated. "Richard, are you seriously telling me to stay quiet while someone steals 11 months of my life?" "Ethan," his voice softened, "be realistic." Realistic. That word pulled me backward through years of memories. The promotion that went to the guy who played golf with the boss. The project I refused to approve because it failed basic safety standards, only to be labeled difficult to work with. The night my ex-wife stood in the kitchen, the refrigerator light casting shadows across her exhausted face. You're too honest to survive in corporate America. Back then, I was angry at her. Now, I wondered if she had been right all along. I'd always believed in a simple American formula my father taught me when I was a kid. Work hard, treat people right, tell the truth, and eventually justice will find its way to you. But sitting in that luxurious office, listening to the hum of the coffee machine in the hallway and the laughter coming from the conference room next door, I realized something even more frightening. This wasn't the first time they'd done this to me. And it wasn't the first time honesty had cost me. When I reached the parking garage, I called my father. He answered on the second ring. "Everything okay, son?" I stared at the steering wheel. "I don't know." What I didn't realize was that only a few minutes later, a new email would appear in my inbox. Sender anonymous. Subject, "I know who stole your design." It didn't stop with them stealing credit for my work. It escalated. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office like I always did. I carried my coffee from a drive-thru near the highway, nodded to the receptionist, and swiped my badge at the security gate. A red light flashed. Access denied. I tried again, then a third time. Behind me, employees began lining up. A man cleared his throat impatiently. Two younger staff members exchanged glances before quickly looking down at their phones when I turned around. "I think there may be a system issue," the receptionist said quietly, avoiding eye contact. But we both knew it wasn't a system issue. A few minutes later, Human Resources sent out an email announcing that my entire team was being reassigned to other departments. The same people who used to stop by my desk for advice on structural design, who asked me how to handle impossible deadlines, now walked past me in the hallway without meeting my eyes. One of them started toward me. "Anyway," he hesitated, looked around. "I'm sorry." Then he walked away. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the betrayal of enemies, the silence of people who once called you a teammate. That evening, I sat alone in my car in the parking garage, staring up at the illuminated office tower rising above downtown Chicago. 22 years, thousands of overtime hours, hundreds of meetings. And now I was being erased from that place as easily as deleting a line of text from a screen. My phone buzzed. It was Richard. "Ethan, we need to talk." This time he didn't bother with small talk. If you continue making accusations against the company, we'll make sure no firm in this state will ever hire you. I tightened my grip on the phone. Are you threatening me? I'm giving you advice. I did the right thing. Richard was silent for a moment. Then he answered coldly. Right and wrong don't matter anymore. What matters is who people choose to believe. A pause. Then I heard laughter in the background. Maybe Richard was having dinner with investors, and suddenly I understood. They weren't trying to silence me. They were trying to erase my entire career. Richard had connections. He played golf with CEOs of major construction companies, shared dinner tables with political donors. There were people who owed him favors. Meanwhile, Jason Reed was everywhere, on the TVs at the gym, on business podcasts, on the cover of industry magazines. He's the future of architecture, a once-in-a-generation talent, the man redefining the Chicago skyline. One afternoon, I was standing in a grocery store buying medication for my father when I looked up at a screen near the checkout lanes and saw Jason smiling into a camera. The man beside me nudged his wife. That kid is impressive. I lowered my eyes and placed the medicine in my cart, without saying a word. A few days later, invitations for the grand opening ceremony were sent out company-wide. People talked about it in the break room, showing off new suits, talking about city officials who would attend, investors, reporters, local celebrities. Everyone was invited, except me. No invitation, no email, no explanation. They hadn't just stolen my work. They had erased my name from the story, turned me into the bitter, difficult employee everyone was supposed to blame. That night, my father watched me sitting silently at the dinner table and asked, "So what are you going to do now?" I looked down at the invitation a former colleague had secretly slipped to me. Across the front, embossed in gold lettering, were the words, "The grand opening of Chicago's newest icon." I folded the invitation and set it aside. They thought they had won. What they didn't know was that I still possessed something none of them had. And that one thing was about to bring their entire ceremony to a halt in front of hundreds of cameras. On the morning of the grand opening ceremony, I woke up earlier than usual. Outside the window of my small suburban house, Chicago's sky was painted in that familiar cold gray of early fall. In the kitchen, the old coffee maker hummed steadily. My father sat at the table, reading a printed newspaper, a habit he'd held on to for decades. "You're not going?" he asked without looking up. I set my coffee mug down. I wasn't invited. He was quiet for a few seconds. Not being invited doesn't mean you don't belong there. Before I could respond, my phone rang, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. "Mr. Ethan Carter?" "Yes." "My name is Daniel Brooks." The man's voice was deep and calm. "I'm an independent structural consultant. I've been reviewing the revised documents related to your project." I sat up straight. "How?" "I can't explain that over the phone." He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Someone altered the foundation specifications." The kitchen suddenly felt unnaturally quiet. "I don't understand." "No," Daniel said. "You understand exactly what that means." I closed my eyes. "Jason." "I reviewed the final revisions," he continued. "There were modifications made to cut costs and accelerate construction." "He approved them?" "The approval signature belongs to Jason Reed." A pause. I stared at my hands. 22 years in this profession. I knew exactly what that meant. And then it hit me. These changes violate the entire set of engineering assumptions the original design was based on, Daniel said carefully. If what I'm seeing is accurate, we're well beyond lawsuits and damaged reputations. I swallowed hard. "What are you saying?" Daniel was silent for a moment. "Dangerous enough to threaten the safety of the entire structure." After the call ended, I walked into the small office at the back of the house. The old wooden desk still carried scratches from years of use. I pulled open the bottom drawer. Inside was the tube containing the original blueprints. I unrolled them. Every calculation, every revision, every handwritten note made at 2 a.m, every approval signature, proof of how the building was actually supposed to be constructed. My phone vibrated again, a text message from an unknown number. Just 2 short lines. "Don't leave the area. They're going to need you." I looked up at the television in the living room. The grand opening ceremony was being broadcast live. Jason Reed stood in front of hundreds of guests, smiling for the cameras. And for the first time in weeks of humiliation, I wasn't angry anymore. I was afraid, because by then, I knew everything was about to change, and it was only a matter of time before all of Chicago discovered the truth. I stood at the back of the ballroom, silent as a ghost who hadn't been invited to his own story. The tube containing the original blueprints rested beneath my left arm. I was wearing an old suit I hadn't touched in years. No one paid any attention to the middle-aged man standing beside the coffee station, watching the stage from a distance. Then again, why would they? Every spotlight in the room was fixed on Jason Reed. Inside the lavish ballroom, crystal chandeliers reflected off expensive champagne glasses. Investors laughed and talked about future profits. City officials shook hands with business leaders. Reporters jostled for the best camera angles. And at the center of it all, Jason was enjoying the moment that belonged to him. "This isn't just a building," he declared confidently. "It's a symbol of Chicago's future." The audience erupted into applause. Camera flashes burst across the room. A female reporter leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "He was born for the spotlight." I watched Jason. That smile was perfect, practiced, calculated. Just a few weeks earlier, he had leaned close and told me it was time to think about retirement. But then, something began to change. On the right side of the ballroom, a security officer received a message through his earpiece. "Understood." His expression changed immediately. He turned to another guard. Both of them looked toward the technical access corridor, the first sign that something was wrong. I tightened my grip on the blueprint tube. Less than 30 seconds later, 2 structural engineers entered the room. They weren't dressed for a celebration. No drinks, no polite smiles. One carried a tablet. The other walked beside him, speaking urgently. "Run another check on the basement data." Could it be a calculation error? I hope so. Jason continued speaking. But his eyes started drifting below the stage more often. In the front row, Richard Lawson lowered his gaze to his phone. The screen lit up. He read the message, looked up, looked back down, then pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped away the sweat forming on his forehead. A pause. I'd never seen Richard lose his composure before, and suddenly it hit me. For the first time in weeks, the man who had threatened to destroy my career looked genuinely afraid. Radio chatter crackled from the back of the ballroom. Confirmed. Say again. Get them downstairs immediately. A building manager hurried through the hallway, then another. Guests began noticing. I thought this was a grand opening. What's going on? An investor set down his champagne glass. A reporter lowered his camera. A woman gently grabbed her husband's arm. I don't like this. Jason paused in the middle of his speech. As I was saying, this building represents. His voice faltered. Just for a moment, but it was enough. The smile no longer looked natural. Then the main doors opened. A group of officials wearing jackets bearing the insignia of the city's inspection department walked in. No one was smiling anymore. They didn't look at the stage. They didn't look at Jason. They headed straight toward the structural control area. A wave of murmurs spread across the ballroom. Why are they here? Who called them? What the hell is happening? Jason looked toward Richard. Richard shot to his feet. For the first time since the ceremony had begun, confidence vanished from both of their faces. And then the alarm sounded. Not loud, not chaotic, just a short, cold tone. But it was enough to freeze the entire room. The sound of glasses being set down, chairs scraping across marble floors, someone drawing a deep breath. No one was paying attention to the giant LED screen behind the stage anymore. No one cared about the speech. Every eye in the ballroom turned toward the entrance. And me? I remained motionless at the back of the room, feeling my heart pound so hard it hurt, because I knew exactly what was about to happen. And when those doors slowly opened, the entire city was about to witness the truth they had laughed at only minutes before. 3 police officers entered first. Right behind them came the city's building safety team, wearing jackets marked with official insignias. The sound of their dress shoes striking the marble floor echoed through the ballroom, cutting through the atmosphere that had been filled with laughter and clinking champagne glasses only minutes earlier. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. The lead inspector accepted the microphone. He didn't need to raise his voice. The absolute silence did that for him. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, slowly scanning the room, We have discovered significant discrepancies between the approved structural plans and the structure that was actually built. A deadly silence settled over the ballroom. A pause. Then an investor jumped to his feet. "Wait," he stammered. "What exactly does that mean?" The inspector turned toward the stage where Jason Reed still stood holding the microphone. "It means this building may be unsafe to operate in its current condition." And just like that, everything changed. A wave of shocked whispers exploded throughout the room. "My God." "You're kidding, right? That's impossible." A reporter slowly lowered her camera. A major donor pushed his chair back. Richard Lawson went so pale it looked as though all the blood had drained from his face. And then, everyone turned toward Jason. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw the thing he'd always hidden behind perfect smiles and endless confidence. Fear. Jason forced a strained smile. "There has to be some kind of misunderstanding," he said, speaking faster than usual. "We've always complied with every regulation." But the lead inspector didn't let him finish. "We need to speak with the engineer who created the original structural design." He paused. His eyes moved across the crowd, then stopped at the back of the ballroom. "Mr. Ethan Carter," he said clearly. "Do you still have the original plans?" Someone gasped. Several heads snapped around. One of the employees who had spent weeks avoiding eye contact covered her mouth with her hand. "No way," she whispered. I stepped forward. One step at a time, slowly, calmly. The sound of my shoes echoed through the silent room. The man whose access badge had been disabled. The man they called a dinosaur. The man whose name had been erased from his own project. Now every eye in the room was fixed on me. I placed the blueprint tube on a table, opened it, and spread the original plans out before hundreds of watching eyes. "Right here," I said, pointing to the specifications. "This is the original amount of structural reinforcement." I turned to another page. And this is what was changed. There was no anger left in my voice, only the precision of someone who had spent more than 20 years mastering his craft. I explained how reducing the materials had undermined the entire load-bearing design, how seemingly minor cost-cutting revisions had created major structural risks, and why continuing operations without correcting those changes could lead to consequences no one in the room wanted to imagine. Finally, I rested my hand on the last set of drawings. "There is still a way to fix this before it's too late." The experts stepped closer. They examined the plans, then nodded in agreement. City officials took notes. No one was laughing anymore. No one was whispering anymore. Then from the back of the room, someone started clapping. A second person joined in, then a third. Within seconds, the entire ballroom was on its feet. Thunderous applause filled the room. The man they called outdated, the man they turned into a scapegoat, had just saved the project from disaster. And after all the lies, all the mockery, and all the attempts to erase him, the truth had finally found its voice. Jason went pale. He took a step backward, then another. His hands were shaking so badly that the microphone nearly slipped from his grasp and crashed onto the marble floor. "No, this can't be happening." His voice cracked. "We only made a few adjustments. We didn't think." "Didn't think?" An investor shot to his feet. "You call putting thousands of people's lives at risk not thinking?" A pause. Richard Lawson immediately jumped in. "Wait, I wasn't directly involved in that decision." He spun toward Jason. "You were the one responsible for that part." Jason looked like a man trapped in a corner. "You approved everything," he shouted back. "You told us to cut costs. You said the project had to be delivered on schedule." Just minutes earlier, they had been the most powerful men in the room. Now, under the glare of cameras and spotlights, they were desperately trying to blame each other. Reporters surged forward. Cameras swung in a new direction. Questions flew from every corner of the ballroom. Who's ultimately responsible? How many changes were concealed? Was the city deliberately misled? Two police officers stepped onto the stage. One calmly began reading the required legal warnings. The cold metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room as they closed around Jason's wrists. Then came Richard. The entire ballroom fell silent. The colleagues who had turned their backs on me stared at the floor. Some avoided looking in my direction. Others stood frozen, unable to believe how quickly everything had been turned upside down. The people who had destroyed my reputation were now begging to save their own. But this time, No one wanted to hear a word they had to say. I didn't smile in victory. I didn't gloat. I simply rolled up my blueprints, tucked them under my arm, and quietly walked out of the building. As I stepped outside, my phone rang. It was my father. When I answered, all he said was, "Son, I never doubted you." I looked up at the Chicago skyline and realized something. True worth doesn't come from applause, job titles, or the approval of other people. It comes from knowing who you are when everything else has been taken away. That day, I didn't defeat them. I found myself again. What about you? If you were Ethan, would you stay silent or would you stand up and tell the truth? Leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe if you believe that integrity is still worth protecting in the end.